Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ina Nekim, and I'm the chair for Tuesday Night Learning. Tonight, we welcome Israel Bitton and his book, Who Will Remember You? He's the executive director of Americans Against Anti-Semitism, a nonprofit that counters social hatred through data, media, and education. Before entering this nonprofit in 2019, Israel enjoyed an award-winning career in marketing, design, and publishing. He holds an undergraduate degree from SUNY University in the history of philosophy and completing his master's of liberal arts at Johns Hopkins University. This is his inaugural book and nonfiction. And the full title is Who Will Remember You? A Philosophical Study and Theory of Memory and Will. It's followed almost back to back by an upcoming title called Brief and Visual History of Anti-Semitism. It just about to come out, or already is out. It's a multimedia educational textbook. Yeah, Israel is also the author of a forthcoming study on anti-Jewish hate crimes, Chosen for Hate. And we will have Israel's book for sale by Sandy from Bibliophile just in the back, and they'll be available for sale after the lecture. So we know that memory and remembrance are an important part of our Jewish identity. And as Rabbi Shaar mentioned a few weeks ago during Sukkot, without memory, we lose our identity. So I think this is a very interesting topic. And please welcome Israel Bitton for his talk about his book. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, let me say thank you to Ina and Robin for bringing me out here, and for everyone who's here for taking the time to come and hear a bit about this book and a bit about memory. Something that I had found incredibly fascinating and led me down a sort of a rabbit hole and to create this, write this book, and happy to be here to share that with you all. So with that, we can get started. Who will remember you? I'm going to jump ahead because we have less time and I can't go through every aspect of the book. But the idea is that I'm sure, I don't know if who's here is familiar with the will to power, Nietzsche's idea, the will to pleasure, the will to life and immortality. The idea is that philosophers have long thought of what is it, the primary drive of humanity, of the individual human? What is it that motivates us? And going back to Greece, all the way through the canon of Western philosophy, you have these different ideas of what it is that really drives us. And, you know, ideas like power, that's really motivating, money, pleasure. Of course, we have other ideas about that, but those are means rather than ends. But to jump ahead, and then we'll kind of work back. In studying memory, the outcome, the conclusion is that rather than it being a will to power, what people are really looking for is to be significant, cosmically significant. And the way significance is determined is through memorability. That is, you know, if you're significant to somebody, they remember you. If somebody, who you think you bump into them in the street and they don't remember you, suddenly you don't feel so significant to them. A very basic idea, but we'll show how this idea already exists and has existed for several thousand years and really is the emphasis of Judaism. As Ina just mentioned, the connection between identity and memory, Jewish identity, the emphasis, we'll get into all of that here. And kind of how did I even get to taking this on? I'm not a neuroscientist, but some things happened to me that alerted me to the phenomenon of memory, that there's something here it's a little more than just a single cognitive function. So really, it began, the year was 2003. And that's me. I was at the height of the Second Intifada. I had joined my older brother who volunteered in the IDF, and I was on the border of Lebanon. And one day, out of nowhere, that missile you see there, that shell, almost killed me. It was launched by Hezbollah, cross-border attack. And literally, my life flashed before my eyes. It's a bit of a cliche, but it actually is true. In that moment, all I can relate and explain is that in an instant that I felt my life may be nearing its end, kind of this roll of film flashes back. I didn't know what to make of it at the time. I was 19, 20, and it stuck with me. It left its mark on me, but I returned to it later on. Fast forward to the year 2012. I was in that car in the front passenger seat when that wheel went off while going down the highway at 60, 70 miles an hour. And in this instant, I not just didn't just see life flashing before my eyes, but there was a distinct moment where I was pretty certain that life was about to end. We were spinning around on a highway, and had it not been for that median that had just started, we would have gone into oncoming traffic. Made it all out alive, but again, I had one of these flashing memory, end of life, you know, type of experiences, and had to make sense of that. I had to understand where was that coming from. What is memory? All right, now memory is the scribe of the soul, Aristotle said. It sounds very poetic and nice, but in reality, what comes to mind when you hear memory? Lots of things can come to mind. There's the cognitive aspect of memory. There's cultural memory. There's memory as identity, communal memory, historical memory. There's just, as we'll get into, many sorts of memory. You can think of a specific memory that you have when you hear memory. So memory means a lot of different things to a lot of different people at the same time. To make the point of how I get to significance and memorability, it's important to understand some of the core functions of memory from the cognitive point of view, which is an idea that you can see repeated throughout the entire physical universe. And that's the three components of memory. You have a capacity to encode, to store, to recall. That's the brain. The brain has that capacity to be able to execute those functions. Then you have the actual memories, content specific. Those are your, we all have our actual memories, the brain that can replay those memories to us, and the ability to experience them firsthand. And then there's the rememberer, the point of view that is looking at that memory. Now, when you take this combination here, what we find is that it actually inheres at every scale. That is, all cognitive processes are of memory. When we speak of perception, we feel that there's a nowness to it, as they describe. It's something different than memory. If I'm perceiving this room right now, it's not because I'm remembering, because, well, I don't know everyone here, so how would I remember? Well, in reality, perception is part of working memory, which is all fed into from your memory. That is, that if you didn't have a memory, if I didn't have a memory of what wood paneling looked like, of what certain colors looked like, textures, I would not be able to create this room for myself in my mind. So, all cognitive processes are of memory. Now, memory inheres in all things and is all things, and that's the big distinction here. So, when you take this, for example, you find that at the atomic level, you have the same reaction. You have, specifically in the brain, take the chemical reactions of the synapses. You have a signal that's being encoded. It has to be sent to somebody, well, different chemicals in the brain that have to process this and have the ability that they have to have a memory of the functions that they need to carry out in order to do it. So every cell in our body has a memory of itself. It has to. By definition, everything in the world is built on a memory, a self-knowing memory. Nothing can exist as it exists. That chair would not be a chair if the molecules did not inherently know. They don't have to explain itself to anyone. It's just known. Finally, because of that, memory is not just epistemological, but ontological as well. That is, when we say we think of memory as let me recall, let me go back and get some information, but memory is existence. That is, again, at the physical level, the only way anything can exist is if it remembers itself. Now we'll see how that plays itself out. So that's how I got to memory. I had these experiences and I said, wait a second, there must be something to memory. Jews are obsessed with memory, hear nonstop about memory. Is it just some cognitive function or is there something more to it? So I went back to the beginning. And what you find is that you have the earliest examples of human burials actually found in a cave in called Kafze in northern Israel. The first human burials. Now you have to think about that. The first burial, what that signifies. If we're talking about a pre-social human existence, the act of suddenly signifying, marking the place of burial is literally significance and memorability. That person suddenly in that ancient society, whatever this was dated to 130,000 years before present, so whatever anyone believes on timing, but that is when it was dated to. Going that far back, we see a pattern in humanity when suddenly they're attributing significance to their families, to their loved ones, by choosing to remember their places of death. Now, before there were Israelites, there were Egyptians who really embody this idea of memory, cultural memory. Now, the idea was that in ancient Egypt, there was the quest for immortality in a number of ways. There was extending life itself through all kinds of potions and elixirs, whatever could work. Didn't actually end up working, but that was one approach that was taken because there were many approaches as the goal was immortality. The other was a belief in metaphysical continuance, that the pharaohs would continue on. They didn't need to continue in this world, but there would be an extension. Of course, there's resurrection and reincarnation. They had a whole process of the underworld with Anubis, etc. But basically, the idea is that there is it does not all end at death. There is memory that lives on, and then of course there's a legacy, and that's through progeny and or memorabilia. Now, in the case of Egypt, they excelled obviously in memorabilia, creating those testaments to their leaders, the ones who were worthy of being remembered. Already back in Egypt, you have this concept of damnatio memoriae, the idea of committing the memory of a person to oblivion. And this was actually done by King Tutankhamun, who was basically forced by the religious elites who were returning the Egyptian religious system to its polytheistic station that it was in formerly. Amenhotep, who was Tutankhamun's father, changed his name to Akhenaten. He changed the city of, then it was not Amarna, but he called the city Akhenaten, Akhetaten rather, which is a belief in the sun god. This was what Jan Assmann called monocosmotheism. So it was, rather than all these different gods that the Egyptians were promoting, he said there was one god, but it was the sun god for his temerity. And really, he had moved the center of power to this new city and created basically a new religion. They wiped out his name from the regnal list. So it wasn't until the 20th, late 19th and 20th century when they discovered these tombs that they became aware of Akhenaten at all. So we have this idea of going way back of you have memory, it's extremely powerful to remember, and it's just as powerful not only to forget, but to commit others to oblivion. Of course, we'll see how that plays out. It's double-edged. The issue with the Egyptian version of memory was that the only ones who were worthy of being remembered were the pharaohs. The Egyptian society writ large, there was nothing to memorialize. So that's part of the outcome of Egypt, which we'll get to in a little bit. Isaac Bashevis Singer once said, "We Jews have many faults, but amnesia is not among them." He was certainly right about that. And there's a reason. Because if we go back and we look at memory in the Torah, we find that, as Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, one of the foremost scholars on Jewish memory, had written, the verb zachar, remembering, appears in its various declensions in the Bible no less than 169 times, usually with either Israel or God as the subject, for memory is incumbent upon both. And we'll see exactly how that plays out. So what I did was I wanted to understand everything that Judaism, the Torah, the five books, the entire canon, later on the Mishnah, Talmud, what was said about memory. If Jews, we know, post-Holocaust how important memory is, but I wanted to get a sense of, well, does our obsession extend, go back much longer than that? And it does. It goes back all the way to the literal beginning, where the very first interaction recorded between God and his creation, his human creation, was the admonishment, really, but was a question, was where are you? Which was really to say, where do you think you are? Which is to say, have you forgotten yourself? Because at the base, when we say sin, when you do to transgress, and we'll get into that, it is not just something that is done maliciously. It is done forgetfully. You clearly have forgotten what you were supposed to do when you do something wrong. And that was the question. It wasn't, how dare you, or I'm going to punish you. It was just a question that puts the onus back on the individual. Where are you? And in doing that, there's no excuse. Adam knew where he was. He did remember. So he had to face his own memory. From the beginning, right at the outset, we get that relationship where memory, remembering yourself in relation to God, is the basis. We see it play out with every single, character and chapter in the Torah. When it came to Noah, it said, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused a wind to blow across the earth, and the waters subsided. When did God finally end? How was that brought about? Again, these words are very specific. God could have just said, God decided it was the end. He had enough, and that was it. No one would have complained that he didn't use the word memory, remember. But God remembered. That's what spurred this action. The waters subsided when God remembered. Now we'll get into that a little more. Further on, in the case of Abraham, thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God remembered Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval. Again, it is God's remembering the individual that is what saves them. And when we're not remembered, we get the story of Joseph. Remember me when all is well with you again, and do me the kindness of reminding Pharaoh of me to free me from this place, is what Joseph said to his fellow prisoner. And yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him, and he languished in prison. This recalls the Innocence Project. I'm not sure if those of you are familiar, but it's an organization that helps individuals who have been wrongfully incarcerated, literally people who have been forgotten by the system, and helps them obviously secure some justice. And we can see a very clear parallel. And in the case of Rachel, who was barren, God remembered Rachel, and that is what opened her womb. So again, we see very clearly that the idea of God remembering, and we'll see what's expected of Jews to remember God in return. This shall be my name forever. This is how I am remembered for all eternity. This is in reference to God of the fathers, of the forefathers. This is how God wanted to be known, as Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi says, as manifesting eternity within history, so that there is that it is not just a God, an almighty deity, but it is a God of history, the God of your fathers, not just your God, but the God of memory as well. And of course, Exodus from Egypt. Remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how the Lord freed you from it with a mighty hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. It starts with remember. and then you eat no leaven bread. You can't do one without the other. And of course, the Exodus of Egypt is the perennial chapter that Jews have memorialized in terms of how often it is said in the daily prayers, in the Shema, every single day, many times a day. What would be the purpose of reminding ourselves constantly that we came from slaves, that we were strangers in a strange land? No other religion, no other, upstart group really wants to show that they came from, you know, such beginnings. They much prefer to say they're, from kings or from very high spiritual people. But at the end of the day, this is the most important point: is to remember exactly where we came from. And there's a reason why we remember that we came from the lowest, and that is obviously so that we don't treat anybody like we're better than them. Likewise, the high priest's breastplate are stones of remembrance for the Israelites. These were not just gemstones, they were not just ornamental, but they were an act of remembrance that fueled the process of remembrance in the temple. When we didn't have the temple anymore, you had tefillin. Shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead. And in the Shema, it is said in the last chapter, the last part, that you have to put these signs. We need these symbols. We need these reminders. Otherwise, we'll forget. What happens if we forget? We follow our lustful urges, as it says, and well, everything hits the fan, and it doesn't end well. So remember, and to remember, we can't just expect that we have memory in there and that we will remember. We need the signs. We need the reminders. Now, this is being established in the Torah more than 3,000 years ago. And there's a reason why it has brought us all the way to this day. Speak to Bnei Israel and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and remember all of the commandments of Hashem and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urges. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God, Hashem. I, Hashem, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Again, there is no separating. It is all one aspect. There is no ability to uphold the Torah without memory at every stage. Even when it came to war, when you are at war in the land against an aggressor who attacks you, you shall sound short blasts on the trumpet, so you may be remembered. If before God, it took God remembering Abraham, it took God remembering Joseph, Rachel, it goes both ways. And we have to remember God, and by remembering God and by sounding the trumpet, as it were, that's how we get God to remember us and keep that cycle reciprocal and healthy. And here we have the Damnatio Memoriae Jewish style, which is Amalek, right? We blot out their memory. It's kind of a strange thing we kind of ensured that we would remember them, because actually outside of the Bible, Amalek is not known to archaeology. So they exist in the world today because we have said every single year, in the Torah cycle of reading, to blot out their name from memory. We should remember to forget them. How does that work? What's the point? Now, the reality is, well, we just said they're only known through the Torah, so it's okay. The Torah is not offended that we remember them, because we only remember them for this particular purpose. And what's the particular purpose? Amalek, as it is known, the gematria equals the same word of doubt. Great. So they came to instill doubt in the Jewish people. Others, God was angry with them because they came from afar to war on the Jewish people. But it was not just war, it was not just to kill. If they were there to raise doubt, they were there to raise forgetfulness. They were there to ensure the Jews would forget their covenant, and in forgetting the covenant would lose their right, their birthright, their place, their homeland, and that was the ultimate purpose. And that's why we remember what we really need to forget, and blot out, which is Amalek. So there's that double-edged aspect. Likewise, when it came to the Ten Commandments, one of them was, do not recall the names of other gods. They shall not be heard on your lips. This is very different than Amalek. Amalek, it's definitive. It's blot them out. Here it says, do not recall. Don't, you know, as if it's a possibility. What would be the reason? Now, what that shows is that the commandments were given in a certain context and they were realistic. The fact is that Jews had polytheistic tendencies like everybody around them, and were still expressing this, and that's why they had, such laws and such commandments. And the idea was that you got to take it easy. You pull it back, and eventually you'll forget. You don't need to recall these names, because they're not really relevant to the Jewish people, and over time you'll forget them. And that's the difference with Amalek and trying to outright blot it out, which in the end you end up making sure that it will persist. And here is an important point of what Jews choose to remember. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. That is to say that the Torah also purposefully records our lesser moments, our, darker chapters. It doesn't get whitewashed. And these are important points to remember as well. Just like we remember that God took us out of Egypt, we also have to remember that right after that, we went with the golden calf. So we don't hide from that, because that's how you take ownership. That's how you get over it, is by remembering and learning from it. If we forget about it, we would be repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. And remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, this is an important point, because when we think of Shabbat, we think of all kinds of restrictions, and you think, okay, so in the Torah, like the other one, it could have just said, keep the Sabbath holy. It was the seventh day. God created it on the seventh day. Keep it holy. But the word here again, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the day of Shabbat and keep it holy. That is, the act of remembering it is essential to keeping Shabbat. You cannot keep Shabbat in the here and now only, because you're always attaching it to the very 7 days of creation. So that is what we're remembering. It is an important part of it, because we go through it, think routine. Well, Shabbat is here. I just have whatever, observations, observances you do, and well, that's what it's about. No, you're remembering the actual 6 days of creation, and that God himself, as it were, rested on that seventh day. It is important to remember that. On that note, it is the Zionist thinker Achad Ha'am who famously said, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews, and that has proven true over time. Likewise, Rosh Hashanah as a day of judgment, as Yom Hadin, all kinds of Yom Hanorah, day, awesome day. It's also Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. It is not just a new year looking forward, but it is, again, we're rooting the beginning of our existence, rooting the beginning of our year, not in some distant future, not in some utopia, but in the past, but in the origin, in the beginning. And this is where we see one of the big differences between Jewish memory and Egyptian memory that preceded it, and Greco-Roman memory that followed it, is that there was this both a democratization of memory, that everyone is worthy of being remembered, not just the pharaoh, and at the same time, through the individual who's empowered to be remembered, we have a stronger collective. And it goes both ways, in that the individuals have an obligation to remember other individuals and the collective has an obligation to remember those individuals, and you get a healthy reciprocal cycle. In Judaism, ask your father, he will inform you. Your elders, they will tell you. It is not enough to wait for others to come and give you those memories and give you that information. In Judaism, you have to go and seek it out. And your elders have to be prepared to explain. So it was not just a project of the elites, that the pharaohs, the elites, they're worthy of remembrance, but no one else. In Judaism, every generation has contributed its own layer to the collective memory of the Holy Land, said Doron Mendels. Now, how can you contribute? Well, there were some ideas about that in some of the later books of the Torah. Alas, the wise person dies just like the fool, Ecclesiastes said, but the beneficent one will be remembered forever. The name of the righteous is invoked in blessing, but the fame of the wicked rots. Makes sense. And then it says, a good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death than the day of birth. And that seems strange. Why would a day of death be better than a day of birth by any measure? And in this regard, it's because on the day of birth, nothing has been done yet. And there's still a lot of risk. At the end of one's life, you already have accrued your significance, your memorability, and you therefore ideally should not have all of that angst in terms of the unknown. Now, for that reason, he continues and says, it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for that is the end of every human, and a living person should take this lesson to heart. So this kind of brings me back to the beginning. How did I end up having these, this vision, memory? Why would I be led back here? And the reality is, it's not just some morbid, idea. It's there's a reason for it, because in thinking of the end, and thinking of that person that you want to be remembered as, it'll obviously change the way you act in your life while you're here. I believe it was Warren Buffett who said it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it. And if people really paused and gave that some thought, that would change the way they acted. Now, forget about 20 years and 5 minutes. We have a lifetime. And in reality, it goes by like that, and we don't know when the last day is. So if every living person should take this lesson to heart. All right. All right. Now we have to ask, why didn't the ancient Egyptian empire survive? They were far more powerful, far more advanced than the Israelites, that's for sure. Same thing can be said for the Greeks and the Romans that came after. But Jews are here, ragtag and all, but we're still here. And those cultures are not. But something has to account for that. We can't just say, well, we have God on our side and it says it there. No, there's actually a very practical reason for it. And that's because we are the people of the books as well. And as it is written, as it was promised really by God to Moses before he brought and left Joshua off to take the Jewish people into the land, was that the Torah, as it were, would never be forgotten from future generations. This was something that was later reiterated to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in what was called a bat kol, a heavenly voice that assuaged his fears of the total loss and destruction of Judaism, of the Torah. So the reality is that when the Babylonian destruction came, there was already the books, the Torah had already been set down in text. So we went to Babylon with books. No other group, went and was conquered and dispersed and actually sent cohesively with their foundational texts. When we came back, the Persians repatriated the Judeans. By the time of the Second Temple destruction, Judaism was much farther along, many more books added to the canon, but more importantly, there was the synagogue. Even at the time of the Second Temple, the first synagogues were appearing around Israel and even throughout the Roman Empire. These synagogues were not exactly the way they were today, but they were essentially the first Jewish communal spaces. Because we had those spaces, and because Judaism was not elitist in terms of who was able to access the Torah. It wasn't just the rabbis. It was incumbent upon every single Jew to be literate and have access for themselves. So at the end of the day, when you have this catastrophic event of Jews being dispersed, where no other there's a reason why all of our ancient foes don't exist anymore, is because it's extremely difficult to hold on, and especially after you've been conquered. The only way you can hold on after you've been conquered is if you have a tenacious grasp of your memory of where you come from, and you need to have a desire to do that one generation after the next, when they're killing you for being Jewish. So we were dispersed but not disappeared because of the fact that we had those books, because that we had the synagogue, physical artifacts that were able to travel with the Jews. And today we have Jewish memory that is literally etched in stone and minds. Here you have in Rome the Arch of Titus, where depicting the scene of the Romans with the Jerusalem temple loot. And of course, with Israel, with the Israeli archaeology today, just spitting out all of these, not just artifacts, but memories. They're attestations to everything that Jews have been telling each other, ourselves, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. Well, archaeology, every year discovers little tidbits that are like, oh yes, I guess we really were there. Like the sign that says to the trumpet place for the Levium who would blow the trumpets, or a sign that in Greek that said Gentiles cannot pass. There was a certain the outer court was open for everyone, Jews and non-Jews. So there were signs. Again, that is the memory that we kept in our minds, and at the end of the day is still etched in stone in the ground, and we combine the two as Jewish memory. Just a single word about the Greco-Roman memory that followed and its differences to the Egyptian memory. The Egyptian memory was all Pharaoh-based. He was the only one worthy of being remembered. In Greece, it wasn't just the Caesar, but it was any hero, anyone who's going to be virtuous and really have something to celebrate. Now, you could see the difference here of this will to, we say, a will to memorability and a will to significance. If you read this is a quote from Achilles in Homer. He carries two sorts of destiny toward the day of my death. If I stay here and fight beside the city of the Trojans, I shall not return home, but my glory shall be everlasting. Whereas if I return home to the beloved land of my father, my glory will be gone, but there will be long life left for me. Now, we see what the purpose is here is really to, memory is about celebrating the gloriousness of some accomplishment or some person's existence. But at the end of the day, it was not about every individual who was determined that they were worthy of being remembered, simply because if you are created in God's image and God demands that we remember him, it's all reciprocated. God remembers those who are created in his image, which is everybody. But it's always a matter of reciprocity. When one side cuts it off, you can rest assured it will stop turning. Now, we're going to jump way ahead and in the book just to explain. So I kind of go through it chronologically. I examine ancient Egypt, examine ancient Israel, examine the Greco-Roman philosophers all through the ages, through the medieval period, through the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and there you start to see the modernization of the idea of memory. We take it for granted that memory is something associated with the mind, the brain. There was no such thing as mind 2,000 years ago. They didn't have the word mind. They barely had the word brain. And they thought that memory actually could have been rooted in the heart. It was not a cognitive feature per se. And from there, after entering into the modern period, you start to have the development of neuroscience and the development of a philosophy of mind, of mental cognitive capacities that is distinct and different than the heart and emotions, which were all paired 1,000 years ago. And from there, enter the contemporary landscape of how Jews non-Jews, popular culture, how we're already expressing these ideas. Because when I say that the the primary human will is to significance, that every human wants to be cosmically significant, which means at least recognition by one other person. It doesn't mean being famous. It means that one person who validates you, says, you know, you should exist. Now, do you really, should we, anyone need validation? But that's just the reality. The reality is that we want to be significant. The way to be and feel significant is we want to be remembered. We can think, I don't think there's anyone who can think of their end of life moment who would say, well, I'm going to hit delete at the very end. Before I go out, just hit delete as if I never existed. Now, I'm not saying that there won't be people who may not be in a great frame of mind that couldn't say something as absurd, but no one in their right state of mind would ever do such a thing, because, well, that's kind of what you live for at the very end. And this is what we saw in COVID, some of the difficulties with the way people were passing. They didn't have their families around. They didn't have that significant other and that last moment to ensure them that they would be remembered and not forgotten. And we'll see how that plays itself out in other aspects of our popular culture. We can't obviously come up to today without going through the Holocaust. And in terms of, we know that we need to remember, but there's some more nuance in there in terms of how memory, remembrance, and significance actually, according to the likes of Viktor Frankl, is what kept people alive. Now, in terms of damnatio memoriae, this, I don't know how many people here know or familiar with the name of Herschel Greenspan. We're familiar. So Herschel Greenspan was a young Jew who fired a shot in Paris at a German diplomat. Eventually he died, and that was quickly seized as the pretext by Hitler and Goebbels for launching Kristallnacht in 1938. Many people don't realize that. They just think Kristallnacht happened, but there was this young Jew who, for other reasons, was his family was being left at the Polish border in basically this no man's land there, and he was very angry, and he took it out on this German diplomat. They seized their opportunity. What he did, incredibly, the Germans were going to make him. They were going to turn this trial into the trial that they were waiting for, to roast a Jew, blame everything on him, everything that was coming. They were building up to have this very public trial. He played it, I would say, he's credited, or his French lawyer is credited with the idea. But basically, he told the Germans that it was von Rath, the guy he killed, he claimed they were having a homosexual relationship. And therefore, what that did was the Nazis didn't want to touch that. The Nazis didn't want to put that out there. So he killed that idea. The Nazis were not able to use that. But among Jews, among non-Jews, his memory has been quashed. Hannah Arendt questioned, the use and purpose of recalling his memory, actually saying positive things about his father, who she had encountered during the Eichmann trial later on. Obviously, his father, Greenspan's father, survived, but the rest of the family did not. He was murdered by the Nazis eventually, not long after, when they had no use for him. But this was someone who many did also blame when the Nazis said, hey, he's responsible. It's this Jew. He killed that diplomat. That's why there's Kristallnacht. A lot of Jews at the time, they read the headlines. They're like, oh, great, a Jew shot a Nazi in Paris, and now we're all paying the price. Well, it was a lot more complicated than that. His family was suffering. He took it out on a Nazi official. And at the end of the day, most of the Jewish people have forgotten who this young man was. And obviously, there are many such examples throughout, the Holocaust that need to be brought back up and remembered, because they have that irreplaceable value. Now, within the Holocaust, within going through that experience, this line here is from Dr. Edith Eva Eger, who wrote The Choice. She is actually a very remarkable woman, but actually a not a student, but someone who studied and became a protege of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote The Will to Meaning, which this philosophy was based on, because the will to meaning is part of it. You want the meaning, but you need still the significance in the other, which is what Viktor Frankl and Dr. Edith Eva Eger say in as many other words. Does anyone know I'm here? There's no question. I don't think there are any fewer words that both sum up the call for significance and memorability all in one. Do they know I'm here? Why would they ask if anyone remembers me? Because does anybody know? Does anyone care that all of this is going on and people are suffering? It didn't seem like it. And that's why there was no, if Jews on the inside felt that they lost their family, there was no one waiting out for them. There was no other one considering them significant and memorable. According to Dr. Frankel, he literally watched people give up in those moments when they discovered that that's it, their wife, their father, child, they were dead. They couldn't hold on anymore. According to Dr. Eger, there were many such cases, and she writes about them, where had it not been for two sisters, going together, they would not have held on. And you have many such instances. So what actually, in that environment, in that hellish environment, what it came down to, I mean, people were being starved. They're not they're not themselves. Why would anybody hold on? What are you holding? Physically, your body's not telling you to keep holding on. It's saying let go. And it was either you had that person beyond yourself to live for, to exist for, or, well, we know the results. And I'm not sure how many are familiar with the Einig Shabbos. Some are, and is again another remarkable aspect is that in the Warsaw Ghetto, another hell on earth, assembled some committee by Emanuel Ringelbaum, who decided that for posterity, for future justice, for future generations, that a group of writers, poets, all kinds of Jews of different backgrounds would take up different posts in the ghetto and start writing, document whatever you can. Take pictures, write, reports, notes, artifacts, keep it. And what they did was they did that basically throughout the entire existence of this Warsaw Ghetto. And in the end, they hid the artifacts in these tins here, and after the Holocaust they were retrieved, and they turned out to be an incredible trove. Not all of some of them were in these milk cans, not all of them were found, but what was found is quite remarkable. Now, if you read the archives, basically there's just a lot of testimony in there. Hi, my name is this. I don't want to die. I'm here with my child. I hope someone will remember me. Literally, almost all of them. What would you be writing for? You're in the ghetto. What would be the purpose? You're not writing a love letter. And almost all of them are expressing something to not be forgotten. My name is this. This is my child's name. My child was too young to die and go forgotten. So here, again, a great example, not just of the power of memory and significance and memorability, but the Jewish obsession with memory, that in the middle, again, you have to really think about it. Who undertakes that? Who, in the midst of being persecuted themselves, says, wait, we're going to think a little bit differently than the rest, and we're going to put our own lives at risk. They were in extra danger because of this. And now we have those memories, those individuals who, yes, they were incinerated, but their lives, no, they did not disappear. How Jews remember, right? There are many ways that we do that these days. In Israel, we see it with the sirens and everyone stopping, getting out of their cars on Memorial Day. But we have many Memorial Days in Judaism. We said Yom HaZikaron is Rosh Hashanah. You have Tisha B'Av is a Memorial Day. You have Yom HaShoah is a Memorial Day. We said Shabbat also is a Memorial Day. And we have, of course, we said here that we're not just mourning the temple, we're remembering the temple. It's important to remember that distinction as well, because a lot of the there's a lot of feeling of you know there's lots of depression, sadness. Jews were always, in this mourning, but it's not just mourning. Oh, they did something bad to us. It's remembering everything about what got us there, and really, it's getting back to where we were. We were ejected from the land because we forgot. It's in the Torah. It says the warning is pretty clear, explicit. If you're not going to follow the rules, you get the boot. And it was true for every single empire that tried to hold on to the land, not just for the Jews. This here, don't have too much time already. We're not going to get too much into it, but I do want to touch on it, especially in light of the Holocaust. I'm not sure, again, who's familiar with epigenetics. It's an emerging field, but basically, the idea is that experience is passed down through our genes. So you have your genes that pass down certain physical attributes, but if you went through certain traumas, now it doesn't get passed down in this overt way where, your kids, you had some trauma and the kids are going to wake up with nightmares, with the same scene. No, but simple example, studies have been done, and second and third generation Holocaust survivors have higher instances of anxiety, alcoholism, and other mental health issues. So we do see that it was an extremely broad study. This is not something, some flimsy study, and there's a lot of work done. There was actually a lot of work. The basis of epigenetics was the aftermath of World War II, but it was the Dutch. There was a Dutch famine. And because the Dutch had some great record keeping, post-war, they had this massive sample size of an entire generation that went without basic nutrition for key parts of their early young adult lives and really childhood lives, so they could see 20, 30 years later what happened to to this generation. And they saw higher instances of diabetes, of heart disease, all kinds of other issues. So the fact is that now it took thousands of years to get to science to tell us, oh yeah, memory, that thing that Jews are obsessed about, it's at every level. It permeates the DNA. Our memory, when there's a reason why we say next year in Jerusalem, why we say every generation they do this to us, because we have that experience. When we're told that we need to remember something that happened 2,000 years ago, it's not God saying, hey, try to imagine something so distant from you. But no, it's something that is in you because it has been wrapped up and unraveled in each of us. If you take anyone's DNA, think about how many contributors there are. You just multiply it going back. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have contributed their experiences that have been transmitted through each generation directly to us, so that when we sit at the Shabbat table, we sit at the Seder table, we're not just detached modern people trying to figure out and fantasize about what the ancient world might have been like. No, we have better information. It's already inside of us. It is part of us. It is us, because the memory and existence and being is one. Memory, we think of, oh, it's in the past. It cannot be the moment. And that's a big mistake people make. And therefore they think, well, memory, it's up here, it's remembering. No, memory is everything. And that's the reason that Judaism has always been obsessed with it, ironically. And not so ironically, you mentioned it before about this, what the rabbi said, and I can just imagine, because memory and identity. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Oliver Sacks, written many books, neurologist. And from this example, Franz Boas, who is actually a Jewish anthropologist who fought the eugenics movement in America. And he wrote, if I do not become really famous, I do not know what I will do. It would be terrible if I had to spend my life unknown and unregarded. Memorability and significance. Doesn't matter who you are. He was someone significant. And that's what he's expressing, because it comes back to that. It doesn't matter if you're the president of the United States. Then you just may have a much less healthy need to, be regarded and known by even more people. But healthily, naturally, we don't need to be known by millions of people. Mostly, absolutely do not. It's about quality over quantity. You could, in most cases, it takes one person. You just need one person in this whole world of billions of people to keep you grounded and knowing and remembering of your own significance. Now, I also want to show how this idea is already in our popular culture. It's out there, it's in the lexicon, it's being communicated and expressed all the time. In this film, Dolomite, Eddie Murphy says, I want the world to know that I exist. A very simple statement is, someone who just wants to be significant by getting recognition, some memory. Hey, do you know who I am? And Michael Jordan, definitely quite an accomplished person, said, I don't think anyone wants to go to their grave forgotten. Now, I didn't, discuss any of that with these people and the idea of Jewish memory, but it's basic. It's out there. It's nothing that's invented here. Rather, it's a way of seeing it that once you turn that on, I would challenge everyone here because ever since I've been turned on to it, I hardly see a TV show, movie, anything where some sort of reference to being significant and remembered isn't made. You'll see it all the time. And again, especially in those end of life moments, what else is there to say? What else would, at the end of it, what would matter? What is it that would matter to any individual? It's not going to be your power. It's not going to be your money. It's not going to be your accomplishments even. It's going to be those memories and the people that are significant to you and that make you significant. So with that, I will leave it and just plug my next book, which is coming out later this month. I'm plugging it not just because it's shameless, but because it is also about memory on the history of anti-Semitism. And there's a little quote about it from the president and about memory, president of Israel. So, thank you.
Well, I think there's a lot that we'll have to remember and act upon after this. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. It really brought back, well, reminded us the importance of not being too comfortable as Jews in places and remembering our history and remembering our identity. So I can tell you personally, as a first generation Jew from the former Soviet Union, not feeling comfortable has its benefits. Allows you to remember and be more aware of threats that are around you all the time. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Just a brief reminder that we have 2 more Tuesday night learnings coming up. We have Debbie Applegate on a lighter note, who writes about a Jewish madam in New York City, and she'll come and talk to us about that. And on November 15th, we'll have our very own Gideon Zellermeyer in conversation with Isabel Vincent, talking about opera and how two really 2 ladies just happened to save Jewish opera singers in Austria during the Holocaust, and because they appreciated opera. So those are 2 interesting things that hopefully you'll join us for. And as I mentioned before, Sandy from Bibliophile is here to, if you want to purchase Israel's book. And thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you at the next ones.